Hello, welcome. We're gonna get started in just a couple minutes. See people coming in, welcome. Hi, everybody. Okay, we're gonna get started. Good evening, and welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. I'm Ben from Greenlight, and we're thrilled to host tonight's event with LaTanya McQueen launching her new book, When the Reckoning Comes. She'll be talking with Megan Giddings, and you're in for an excellent time. Before we start, I just want to say a huge thank you to LaTanya, Megan, the team at Harper Perennial for making this happen, to all of you for showing up. I see everybody coming in. Thank you. We're not able to host events in our store spaces still, but our community of authors and readers is still here, and we're grateful for your support and the chance to make space for conversation and connection. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. This is a Zoom webinar. You can hear the speakers. They can't see or hear you, but they can see that you're here, and you can interact with the webinar in a couple of ways. There's the chat first, which you can find by clicking on the icon that looks like a speech balloon. You're welcome to post your comments and thoughts in the chat. That's a great way to show your appreciation of the author and interact with your fellow attendees. And if you have a specific question, which we love, that you'd like answered by the author, please post that question in the Q&A module, which you can find by clicking on the icon that looks like two speech balloons. And we'll be pulling questions only from the Q&A to be answered, not from the chat. And importantly, tonight's featured book, When the Reckoning Comes, is available for sale from Greenlight Bookstore. You can shop in person in our bookstore locations 12 to 7 every day of the week, and you can purchase LaTanya's book and many others on site, or you can order it online at greenlightbookstore.com for a quick pickup at the store or for shipping anywhere in the US. I'll drop the buy link in the chat after the intro. If you care about supporting the careers of authors and the ongoing existence of independent bookstores, buying tonight's featured book is a great way to show your support. Okay, now for our participants. Our interviewer tonight is Megan Giddings. She's an assistant professor at Michigan State University and affiliate faculty at Antioch University's low residency MFA program. Her debut novel, Lakewood, which you can also get online, was a finalist for 2 NAACP Image Awards and an LA Times Book Prize in the Ray Bradbury Speculative Science Fiction and Fantasy category. And Megan's second novel, The Women Could Fly, is forthcoming from Amistad in 2022. She will be speaking with our featured author tonight, LaTanya McQueen. She has an MFA from Emerson College, a PhD from the University of Missouri, and was the 2017-2018 Robert P. Dana Emerging Writer Fellow at Cornell College. And currently, she's an assistant professor of English and creative writing at Coe College. She published an essay collection titled And It Begins Like This, and has been featured in Best American Essays, Carve Magazine, and Bennington Review. Her new book, which Megan was just previewing for you, When the Reckoning Comes, is a haunting novel about a Black woman who returns to her hometown for a plantation wedding and the horror that ensues as she reconnects with the blood-soaked history of the land and the best friend she left behind. The book has been praised by acclaimed writers Brandon Hobson, Laura Vandenberg, and tonight's interviewer, Megan Giddings herself, who says, I'm going to quote you, Megan, LaTanya McQueen's When the Reckoning Comes is so deliciously uncomfortable. There were moments where I had to put the book down, take a deep breath, and like Mira, its protagonist, urge myself to go further. This is a novel like Octavia Butler's Kindred that reminds its readers that as long as people don't acknowledge how much of the past still shapes the present, it will bring its whips, its hatchets, and its fists to make us learn. And now LaTanya is going to start us off with a reading from the book, and then she'll be talking with Megan and then with all of you. So please take it away, LaTanya. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just going to read a little bit from the beginning, from the first sort of major chapter. Okay. Celine was getting married. They hadn't needed to keep in touch for Mira to know how much this wedding meant. As teenagers, Celine filled their spare conversations with talk of gowns and decorations, flavors of cake and themes. Mira entertained the fantasy with her. They had such little in their lives that the dream of a wedding felt extravagant. They'd linger in the magazine aisle of the supermarket, flipping through the bridal pages as they scanned the dresses, sheath or A-line, mermaid or ball gown, sequins, lace. Celine searched for the perfect one, always thinking she found it to later find another. They were all beautiful, Mira told her. They were all already perfect. But for Celine, it was about more than the dress. The wedding was a chance for her to be seen as someone worthy, as beautiful, as deserving of the attention spent. Still, they weren't teenagers anymore, and it had been a decade since she'd seen Celine, almost as long as the heyday of their friendship. They hadn't been friends for a long time, but Mira wondered about all of those years in the beginning. How long did the sense of obligation to someone last? Did she owe it to Celine to come to her wedding if they'd once been friends? Oh, I don't know what I'll do if you're not there, Celine continued on the phone, and the knot of guilt wrangled inside of her. Celine told her the wedding would be during the height of summer. Mira mentally mapped out the logistics of the trip, allowing herself to entertain the possibility. Of course, she'd have to find something in her closet to wear, buy a dress on sale if she couldn't. A summer wedding meant she wouldn't have to take off from teaching. It was not a long drive from Winston-Salem. It would take a couple of hours if she didn't hit any traffic, a half day at most. If she left early enough, it wouldn't be so bad. A new dress, the cost of gas, and the expense of a hotel for a night or two. She could afford all that. So it wasn't a question of if she could or couldn't go. The real question was if she wanted to, and she couldn't say she did, not with any real sense of authority. If it's the money, don't worry about it. I'll pay for your room. I can send you money for your travel too. Anything you need, Mira, just let me know. All you have to do is come. Mira bristled. Was this another insult hiding underneath? She couldn't be sure. You don't have to pay for my travel. I can afford it. Oh, I didn't mean, I know you can afford it, but free is always better, isn't it? What about your room? It's the least I can do. They've made these sweet-sized cottages on the property. I'm sure you'll love it. Wait, Mira said. It hadn't occurred to her to ask where the wedding would be. She'd assumed it'd be at the country club right on the border of the town, near the golf course and the old money homes, but the mention of cottages threw her off. Where are you having this? This millionaire bought and renovated the old Woodsman property. It's become a pretty popular touristy place since it opened. We're going to be the first to have our wedding there, which is a little exciting when you think about it. Celine, you can't be serious, Mira blurted, refusing to hide her disapproval. You can't possibly be having your wedding at that plantation. You wouldn't even recognize it now, Celine responded, missing Mira's point. The property has been completely redone. Celine should have known it wasn't about what the place looked like, but then Celine hadn't been there with them that day, only heard the story afterward like everyone else. Mira and Jesse were the ones who'd snuck off, and in the time since, who knew what it had become? The history rewritten, erased, having become something entirely new. This was what Celine was trying to convince Mira of as she pressed the phone against her cheek and thought back to a past she'd hoped to forget, to the girl she'd been, and to the friend she'd loved. Thank you.
Oh, honey, that was great.
Thank you. Thank you for clapping.
You deserve it. And I wish you could be in person so that we could all be clapping for you and you could hear it.
Thank you. Thank you.
So let me start with a question that I don't think it's going to be a spoiler for the book, that ghosts appear in some ways, because there's the ghost of the friendship that these two used to have. There's the ghost of the plantation, which are exciting and delicious. We might talk a little bit more about later. Let's start basic first. Why do you think you're drawn to ghosts and spirits?
That's a good question, because with this book, I think the ghost part came like later. And even in the book, like I wanted to walk a line between what felt real versus what could be possible. So in the book, there's like, so the larger sort of premise of this, or one of the premises of this book, is that there are these like ghosts, these slave ghosts who are possibly, we don't know, are seeking revenge on the descendants of the owner, those who once owned them, right? And so throughout the book, there are these occurrences that are happening, and it sort of walks this line between, are these occurrences, is this a real situation, or are these explainable through real life circumstances? So I don't know, like, I feel like, I'm not sure what was the inclination to have the ghosts. I do think, I mean, I feel like with a lot of Black history, it's there's ghosts, right? Or I guess mythologies and these folklore sort of stories, right? And so I think part of that has also too been an influence, but I don't have like one specific thing. I feel like for a lot of questions, I'm not gonna have like one definitive.
Oh, that's fine. You're a writer. You need to have more than one specific thing, or else you can't write a novel. So, have you ever seen a ghost? And I'll freely admit, I feel like I have, and I believe in ghosts. So that I'm putting it out there, so that if you want to tell us about a ghost moment,
like a ghost, I don't know if I know, but like, you know, so my mother's family is they are based in rural North Carolina, up near the Virginia border. And the house that my mother grew up in, my family likes, I don't know if likes is the right word, but like they tend to believe that it's a house that is haunted, and that the land is like haunted, and they will tell these like stories. And I did go back a couple years ago when I was trying to write another book, when I was trying to write this essay collection. I went back to see the house, and and I don't know how much of it is like me thinking from these stories versus I don't know, like, I don't know if anybody, like, I don't know if you've ever like been in like the rural South, but like, I feel like when you go, or at least for me, whenever I go back, and like, I feel like I'm going back to a different time, but also too, like some of these places, I don't know, like I don't know how much of it is like me and my own family and their connection to this place versus like me and my own sort of association with the South versus like it actually being something spooky. I don't know, but like I do, like whenever I go back, or when I went back at that time, like I felt like that was the closest I felt to like something at the very least unnerving existing.
So, and I know this is going to be kind of a cliche thing for me to say, like the location is a character, and I know that people kind of laugh, but it is in your book a little bit, where the Woodsman plantation, it does function in a way where a good character is supposed to. You give it like a clear history, you give it actions, because of the ghosts that might inhabit it can react and speak to the things that's happening. And one of the things I really admired when I read the book, and when I picked it up a few days ago to get ready for our conversation, I started admiring again, where your approach shifts and becomes lyric and different for the plantation when you're describing it and moving into what may or may not be real.
Oh, that's interesting. I wouldn't have thought that.
Well, how did you find like the voice and character of this place for you?
Gosh, that's a good question, and I don't know. So like for like the Woodsman plantation specifically, or like
Not with the Woodsman plantation specifically, but if something else comes out, because I think it's a question a lot of writers ask themselves, though, like how do I make place transcend so it doesn't just feel like a filler in my work, or like the background, but something that also is urgent and important?
it might be, you know, I don't know if this is going to answer the question, but like it's something that I've been thinking about these past couple of weeks, because I did an interview with somebody, and they were some people I talked to with the book, they very clearly from the get-go think of it as horror, and they think of this place as a horror, and they right from the beginning, like they are unsettled and they're scared, and it's right from the beginning. And then there are others who read the book, and I've talked to you about the book, and like they feel like it's slow. They feel like it's slow, or that like it's, or they'll say sort of that it's like atmospheric. I get that a lot. Or that the horror is like subdued. And it's been interesting because I do think a lot of that is coming from our own associations to a place. Like I think the people who from the beginning sort of see it as horror, it's like they know what these plantations, they a little bit, my perception that they know a little bit more about what these plantations are, or they have some sort of connection or a history, or they have a different association to it than I think some others do. And so I guess what I'm getting at is, in terms of your question, right, like thinking about like the voice of this place, I think a lot of that has come from, I guess, this like my own associations of what, like my own kind of connection to these places, my own history and family background to these places, and that kind of coming through, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense to me, because it's one of those things where you can read the book and get the impression that the grounds are to the right kind of person, and I might mean white person there, of these grounds are beautiful and idyllic. But the way you keep framing it is that we're never allowed to be comfortable with this plantation. We're never allowed to see it through the lens that it still shows up so much in popular culture, where it's the grand sweeping home, the big trees, the open lawn. There's always a hint of violence or terror anytime you come back to the plantation and focus solely on it. And
I wish that, like, because if you go, I don't know if you've ever visited any of these places before.
I'm mostly in the Midwest or East Coast. It's just how it's gone.
I visited a lot, particularly in Louisiana, but I did visit a couple in like the Carolinas, and then in Mississippi. It's not that far removed from from the book. Like they tend to be like, a lot of them, they tend to be tourist attractions, and they cater to white audiences, to be blunt about it. Like they rarely talk about slavery. If they do, it's an afterthought. They present these places as they're worthy of being seen and remembered and being talked about because of the fact that the owners were wealthy. And so they should be admired for that in and of itself, that they had money. And so because of that, right, like when you frame it in that sort of light, then while it's not right, but it makes sense why people would want to have weddings, right? Because it's like, okay, this is representative of class and wealth and status, which is what one of the characters in the book, like how she, but like, I guess the thing that I'm kind of getting at, or trying to kind of get at, is that there isn't like there is no fear for a lot of people, because it's not presented as a place that has this history of like tragedy or pain. Like it's presented as, this is worthy of being admired and wanting because it's a status symbol.
How much do you think that your writing this book went into kind of disassembling the notion of that, or pushing back and thinking more about a place can look beautiful or have status, but also let's be nuanced, let's be complicated here?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was thinking about the ways in which people are seen and the ways in which history contributes to how we see ourselves and how we see each other. With the plantation, Mira, she goes there for this wedding, and like she becomes very aware that how people see or don't see Black people like her, right? And she becomes more aware of like the ways in which she ways in which people think of Black people as a stereotype, the ways in which people think of Black people as being worthy of just entertainment, right? Like all these different. So a large part of the book is about, like, that's just one example, but a large part of the book is about that, like the way in which these characters see themselves, see each other, how they treat each other based off of like how they've come, like how they think of themselves in relation to other people. And then also do how history like connects with that. As a not a book example, but like a teacher, like sometimes I teach my students here, we do like an exercise where I have them like research like sundown towns. They're not aware of like they look at the sundown towns from where they grew up, they're their own hometowns, and they're not aware oftentimes that where they grew up is a sundown town. And so you can sort of see, like whenever I do this and I talk about it with them, you can sort of see how they never would have thought, and they are beginning to sort of question, you know, how their current reality might have been shaped by this history. It's like, oh, well, I don't have any Black friends, I don't know any Black people, or don't know any Black people, right? How much of this is based off, how much of this is connected to the history that has shaped, you know, my reality? And so I was thinking about that too with the book. That was a long answer. Sorry.
I loved it though. It gave me a lot to think about. I'm going to try to stay on track with my questions because you are tying to something I wanted to ask you about. So let's talk about genre in this book for a minute, because I've also seen it treated as a straight up horror novel. Yeah. And I mean, to be fair, you do have a lot of things in it in terms of, you could probably have written just a horror novel about being a Black person who returned to their predominantly white hometown. There's also the horror in going to a wedding just like that. And you bring in all these elements that could all be related to horror, but you also have things that I thought felt very romantic at times. You also have a straightforward psychological, just literary novel in the middle of this too. And I wanted to know, how did you end up balancing all of the different genres in this book? Because they all have to work together. And they do. They really do.
Yeah, the horror is interesting because I didn't think of it as I never really thought, I see it now. And I feel like also too, your book has been also in times categorized as horror.
My book has been so many genres that sometimes it feels like if a literary book has a plot, it's not going to be literary anymore because it's.
Yeah, they do that. But yeah, I didn't think of it, and I see it now. Like I see why people are thinking of it in this way, right? But at the time, I wanted to write a book that utilized history. All of the horror, or the things that I think you could easily pinpoint as identifying as horror, are things that are based in truth. I didn't make any of it up. Even the things that feel really like unbelievable or things that are based in truth. So I guess to me, when I looked at it, I didn't think about that, right? Because, so it's interesting when people like do read those scenes and then they're like, oh gosh, this is horror. Because to me, I'm like, oh, well, this is history. Yeah. So I don't know. So it's like, so it's hard to kind of talk about how I integrated that element because I wasn't thinking of it in these terms. And the same thing with the speculative piece. Like I wasn't thinking about, I want to write like these ghosts. I was thinking about I wanted to kind of create a line. And also too, part of the issue is that if you do kind of create this literal slave ghost revenge story, it's almost like a damned if you do, damned if you don't, because if you do that, if you really kind of go in that direction, then there's the worry of am I affirming Black stereotypes by having these right? And so that's why I kind of walked the line with it, because I wasn't sure, I didn't want to go that direction either. And then the love story, I don't know, everything I write always in some way has either grief or a love story somewhere thrown in there. So I don't know, I have to do it, I guess. It's just,
You know, as you were talking, I thought might be really helpful for you. What is horror?
that's a good question. I asked my students once this because I thought I knew, and then so I asked them, and then one of them was saying how it has to instill a sense of dread, right, in the reader, or that's like one of the characteristics of it.
Yeah, but I mean, Gen Z, I teach Gen Z too, and they're always like, oh, this is so cringe or mortifying. So it feels like you could just write a novel about, I don't know, teaching college sometimes to them. And they would be like, this is a horror novel. I dread it. I'm uncomfortable.
No, because like, I guess that's the thing, right? Like with this, because I've noticed that some people don't think of this book as horror, and then some do, right? And I think it depends on your like associations to it, and but also too, like I've noticed, like in thinking about this book and talking about this book, like I've thought back to like past like things that are characterized as horror, not just in terms of books but film, and they don't have the same effect with me. Like I don't know if you like, I don't know, this might be a question for you too, but like I can't think of like a horror movie that really affects me in the way that it should, because most of them, like I'm so aware of the pretense of them, or I'm aware that this is not like catering to or like meant for me, that I can't get into it. But like a film that does feel like a horror film that is not a horror film, but it does to me, is like Queen and Slim. I don't know if you ever saw this film.
I haven't seen it yet.
That to me feels like a horror film, even though it's not, right? Because of the associations that I have to it and the premise, right? So I guess, I don't know, I've been thinking about it a lot, like this question of like, what is horror, and like how, or what are the distinctions or characteristics of it? And I do think it's that the idea of dread, right, or instilling a fear, right? But it can be, I think it can be subjective in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think sometimes like I feel that same dull sensation, and then I think about all the things that really scared me. Like I don't know, I got really scared on Friday last week watching Zola. I got scared once watching Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, in the moment where he's like hiding in the mailbox, just because the idea of someone being hidden in a mailbox and they kind of reach out towards you when you're putting in mail is terrifying to me. So I also think that so much of the time when I'm trying to identify horror, it tells me so much about me and my anxieties. It pushes exactly on the thing. And for me, like we talked about this before, and I'm pretty comfortable about saying, like, I'm a really anxious person. I don't know what's going to set me up. So sometimes I feel like all of my books are going to end up being, for some people, horror, because I don't know if I can ever divorce my point of view enough from like how I live life, where I'm just, I don't know what's going to make my brain suddenly have an alarm bell in it.
That's a good, I mean, I don't know. I do think it is subjective. It's interesting too to kind of think about this, because like traditionally the horror genre is like white.
Yeah.
And male, right? And so I wonder also as well, like thinking about our own kind of connections to a thing and how that affects how you read it or see it, right? Like I do sort of wonder how like how people who are like horror aficionados, how that's going to affect how they read or think about this book, right? Because I don't know if it's going to, like, I guess my concern is like trying to compare it to this genre that is filled with people who are doing something that have have a different like background to it, right?
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
No, it's part of my hesitation too. It's like there are people who know the tropes and study it. And I mean, you have your doctorate, you know how much effort goes into actually studying, writing, and thinking deeply about it. I think it just breeds a little bit of cautiousness when you know that there are people who have really immersed themselves in it, and then you write your first book and people are suddenly saying that you're good at horror, like, which I've seen some reviews say that about this book, that this is a good horror book.
Oh, that's interesting. That's good. I mean,
I also shouldn't bring up reviews to you on your
I know.
pub day. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no, I try not to think about it.
Oh, me too, but sorry. People like your book, but sorry. Anyway. Let's talk a little more about history. So how much research did you do for this book?
Not much during the act of writing it, because at the point where I started writing it, like I knew, and I had, at that point I had already done the PhD, and so that, I think that had sort of prepared me in terms of like knowledge base. I wrote the book really fast. I hope my agent's not, she's probably sorry. I wrote the book really fast. I wrote it, the first draft, within about 3 months. And then,
oh my God.
Yeah, I know. I feel bad.
You shouldn't. Zora Neale Hurston wrote Their Eyes Were Watching God in 6 weeks.
But then we revised it over the next year, so.
Yeah.
So, it wasn't like, it's not one of those stories where it's like, oh, I wrote the thing and then sold it. We revised it for a while. So, but I wrote it really fast. And I think it was because I was just tired at that point of, I just got to a place where I was like, this is what I want to do. And I know what I'm going to do. I know what I want to do.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do it. And then hope for the best. Yeah. So I didn't do that much research. And I had already visited like plantations at that point, and I had notes. I'd written an essay before on it, so I knew that. Most of the like the horror, right, comes from history, and I already knew all that too. So it's just a matter of filling it in.
My mind, sorry, I'm still reeling a little bit, the 3 months for the first draft.
Yeah, it sounds bad, but then also too,
it doesn't sound bad. I'm always,
I think like I need to sort of like disclaimer, like it was 3 months, but it was like 3 months of a really terrible time. Like I was doing a fellowship and I didn't see I was super isolated. I didn't see anybody. And I would get up like at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I would work until really late. And then sometimes I have trouble sleeping. And so sometimes I would just work like 24-hour shifts in this little office that I had. And then that was it. So, and then, I would go, like, I lived in a town of like 1,000 something people.
Yeah.
So, like the highlight of my day was going to the grocery store and like buying a rotisserie chicken or something. So it wasn't, I guess my larger point was, it wasn't like a healthy time of my life. So, but I wrote this, so.
So is there anything that majorly changed in the revisions you did over the year, though? Was there any things that, like when you think about the book, like sometimes when I think about the book I just finished writing, I can't even remember what's in it now because I've done so many revisions and thought so much about it that sometimes the things that I've drastically cut, they're just in the book to me. The book is probably like so long in my head. But do you have anything like that with When the Reckoning Comes that either transformed or changed during that revision process?
That's a good question. We went through a lot of work. So it's hard to remember because it was also too long time ago. I can't remember. I know we rearranged a lot of the beginning. We cut a lot of the beginning. There's like an intercepting narrative. I think probably one of the biggest changes in here I can think of off the bat is like there's this intercepting narrative throughout the book that is like of the slave perspective, telling kind of like this background, and that was not in there in the original drafts, and it was something that was suggested to do, and like that came like really kind of towards the end of the book. So that's like a big major piece that was different. I'm trying to think of, it's hard to remember, goodness gracious. It was a lot of like filling out plot inconsistencies, and also to character development, particularly of Mira. So I'm really grateful to both my Asian editor, who knew what to do, because I I did not, and it was a lot of revision.
I'll ask you one more question before Ben comes back and opens up for the full Q&A. Let's talk a little bit about Mira. And let me start with a basic question. Why is Mira a high school English teacher?
That's a good question. I used to work in public schools. I did not work as a teacher, but I worked as like an aide, and I also too I worked as an aide to students who are on the spectrum, and then I also for a while I was like a teaching assistant, and then also too I worked like a after school program for like elementary kids up through like 13 or so. So I have like that background, and I think a lot of what Mira is dealing with comes from, I think, those experiences. So like the way in which public education in the US, like there is not a lot of funding.
Mm-hmm.
The way in which often students of color are forgotten about, the ways in which in some places, right, like the school to prison pipeline that happens. So Mira is a teacher who is working at a school that is having cuts, is where their students, you're sort of dealing with a lot in terms of larger institutional problems and larger sort of systemic problems. So I wanted to show that in a way that you can, like, if I made her like a college teacher, the same sort of issues wouldn't kind of come up. But that was why. And then the big thing with her, right, is like she's also anti-Black. Like I wanted to write a character who has these biases, and part of her sort of trajectory is like her examining her own biases and like where this comes from, right? And so I wanted to show her having these thoughts and these behaviors and the way in which they affect her job. And I felt like it would be better to have that in the public school setting as opposed to college, where I think students would more question.
Yeah. Do you feel like maybe one of the other big journeys of this book is Mira's understanding or exploration of her Blackness?
Yeah. As well as sort of coming to terms with the idea that it doesn't matter how people see you, right? Like it's never going, you can change your behaviors, you can change how you look, you can change all these sort of things, and it's not going to matter at the end of the day. And so it's about a kind of like coming together, there's like a Black nationalist sort of undercurrent that's sort of happening in the book. And so part of her thing is just like, in order to kind of fight this larger system of oppression, like we need to let go of these sort of minor things that are hindering us. But yeah, that's one of the themes.
I love how you put that at the end.
Thank you.
Well, I'm going to come back on now, if that's okay, Megan, and get some questions from our audience. Thank you both so much for that wonderful discussion and for the reading. I have one to start us off already. This is a craft question. Did you have the idea for this book before you started writing it? Was it something you let gestate for a while before you started exploring it? And it kind of relates to how you were talking about how you had the history in your mind, you visited places, you kind of knew what you wanted to do. So yeah, I'm curious about that too.
The book idea came from several different things. It's hard to kind of come up with like a short soundbite answer, I guess, but I was working on, or I was thinking about working on another book at the time. And as part of that, I wanted to visit a couple of plantations to sort of see, to learn about history, because my family, they came from plantations. They were working on plantations, and so I wanted to learn more about it. And so I went and I visited a number of them, and then I was struck when I visited about like how these places are, and I couldn't let it go. So part of the book comes from that. Part of the book comes from when I was at the University of Missouri. I was doing a PhD there, and I was there when there were student protests that happened, and I was there when there were racial threats being made. And I remember at the time how afraid I was, and how I just like even sort of like leaving my apartment was like a struggle. And at the same time, around that same time, another friend of mine, we weren't friends at the time and became friends later, but like another friend of mine was doing a PhD at another school, and they were also having racial upheaval there at his school. And he like, so a similar situation, but like his sort of response to it was to become even more active and to be like to be more active in the community and to be more like politically minded, I guess. And whereas my impulse was to sort of retreat and to try to like to like self-efface, I guess. And so I was interested in like, I guess, what was the difference between us, and like what caused me to not go to action. And so I guess like part of the book for Mira, right, is that like she believes she is afraid, right? She's afraid to be to rock the boat, or to do anything that is going to affect how people see her in a negative light. So so part of the book came from that. Part of the book also too came from this larger idea of how historically Black people have been policed and murdered out of white fear. And so I thought it would be interesting to write a book that looked at the idea of the white gaze and examined it and utilized it in its premise, as well as utilized it in its premise, but also to thinking about it in terms of how people would read and respond to it. That's a long answer, I'm sorry.
No, not at all. Along those lines, it's interesting you bring up, thinking about what was going on in college campuses. And a question I have is, I feel like there is often this misconception that this problem of spaces being utilized by white people, as you were talking about, and not recognizing their history and the trauma that was centered there, there's this misconception that that's centered in the South only, that doesn't also apply to so many other places in this country. And I wonder if you thought about that at all when you were writing the book, how, there are also examples of, things like sundown towns and other neighborhood focused discrimination that span across the spectrum of the geography of this country.
Yeah, it's everywhere, and erasure is everywhere too. There is that like what would it be, like assumption, right, that these things are just in the South. Yeah, it's something that I thought about, but like I wanted to write a book about the South. I'm from the South, right? And so, and I think also too, like we have, like in the same way that there's this assumption that these things only happen in the South. I think also too, as an American culture, we tend to like mythologize the South. We romanticize the South, right? And I was interested in that as well, like examining that as well in the book, right? Like I don't know, like we do this, we do it with the North, we do it in New York too, that sort of like romanticizing, right? But like New York doesn't have the same, I mean it does, but actually it does, right? Because like New York also too has like a horrible racial history. So yeah, similar way.
Um, and that next question, kind of shifting gears a little bit, you talked a bit about the year of revisions and, grateful to your editor and agent, but I'm just wondering how you kind of conceive of and decide what voices to let in that editing process, because it can get really crowded in the mind, and how to decide whose feedback to really prioritize.
So like how it, so like I guess, like I don't know, so like for me it was just working with the agent, then working with the editor, so it was really just sort of like one person each time. So I guess like thinking about that question, like it would be like do you listen to this person or not, and like, right, like that would be, is that the question, like is that the question, like thinking about like how you decide?
Or do you share it more widely, with friends or other readers? Or
I've never had that really. I've only had maybe 3 or 4 people over the course of my entire writing career who like have looked at a thing or two over the years outside of like actual workshop. So I haven't really had the same sort of like writing community that I think a lot of people have. So I was grateful. I was really grateful that I had an agent and editor who really wanted to do extensive work, right? Because I just didn't have anybody willing to invest in me in that same sort of way. So I just didn't really think about it. This is not to say that there weren't times where like the edit, like I was like, what am I gonna do, right? But then you take a moment and you think about it, and then you go back to work, I guess. So
yeah. Well, I have one more question, Megan. I don't know if you had any other questions come up. I also want to leave a chance for you to ask anything else if you have it. But you talked a bit about, how you would ask your students once what to them is horror, just as you're considering it for yourself. And I'm just curious how your teaching and your writing interact. I mean, that's a broad question, but do you feel like the questions you're asking yourself in the projects you're working on and the writing you're doing, really influence what you want to bring out with your students?
I guess for me it's different because like students, I'm always sort of interested in, like, I guess I go about teaching thinking about like what they want to learn or what they need. So it doesn't intersect with my writing too much in that same sort of way. If does that make sense? So like so it doesn't with like research interests or even like the structure of these classes, because I'm always sort of thinking about, plus the also too, I teach primarily undergrads, and so well I teach undergrads, and so they are like the things that they're interested in are very, very different. I don't know if that's it. I don't know, Megan, do you teach undergrads?
Oh yeah, like my day job is it's all undergrads, and then it's only at Antioch where I have MFA students.
Do you find that they have the same interests?
I think what I find that unlocks my writing from teaching undergrads is when you're, at least for me, when I'm explaining something about the way fiction can work, and suddenly the thing that comes out of my mouth is the thing I need to do in my own work, where it's like, oh, you idiot, you need to change the point of view. You've just spent an hour and a half telling undergrads that you can do that whenever. It's part of your toolbox. And then suddenly it's like, well, why aren't you being as generous with yourself as you can be with your students? And I think that's more of my reaction than more of like hearing about their thoughts about like what their projects are and then getting pumped.
That's interesting. Huh. Yeah. I wish my writing and the students intersected, and I wish they had similar interests as me, but like I think it's more affected, like my writing has been affected by like classes that I've been in more so than teaching. Yeah.
Well, I have one more question, and I'm gonna put the book buy link in the chat one more time just now. But our last question is going to be for Megan. First, it's a comment. Says, I haven't read it yet, but comes out today, so that makes sense. But listening to you talk about what you've written, it sounds like you have used a really powerful voice to explore important topics. Do you know what you may write next?
Is this for me or Megan? I think this is for Megan, right?
Oh,
This is for you.
It's from an audience member named Meg, a different Meg for
I was
you.
like, Megan, tell us what you're writing next.
Tanya, this is about you. This is your night.
Oh gosh, I'm not right. I was trying to write another book and then I just had to stop. I've been trying to write a book that uses the sterilizations that happened in North Carolina, and like, so trying to kind of write, I don't know, something that deals with that. I just haven't decided like what this is going to look like. And I tend to like, I need a lot of time to kind of think through things. So, and I haven't thought it through. I've noticed anytime when I haven't thought something through and then I try to like write it, it just is a mess. So, but yeah, no, that's, I don't know. So right now it's just sort of taking a break, I guess. Yeah, I wish I was writing, like
Percolating. That's what I call that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, LaTanya. Thank you, Megan, for that great, interesting conversation. It was a privilege to listen to. And don't forget to stop in at Greenlight or buy the book online when The Reckoning comes. And we really appreciate you showing up. Hope you all have a good night. Thanks for the buy in the chat, everybody. Thank you, LaTanya. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.